When I inherited the land from my father, I never thought I'd end up fighting a homeowners association over it. The property wasn't small, 57 acres of rolling hills, a private lake, and oak trees older than the town itself. It was quiet, beautiful, and most importantly, ours. My father had bought it in the 70s when land was cheap, built a simple log cabin, and taught me everything I knew about hard work. I'd always imagined one day building something meaningful there, maybe a retreat, a small ranch, something that honored his memory. But life had other plans. After my father passed, I moved away for work, leaving the land in trust and paying taxes every year like clockwork. When I came back almost a decade later, the world had changed. The little town I remembered had turned into a sprawling suburban maze of developments, shopping centers, and chain restaurants. Where we used to have hayfields, there were Starbucks and nail salons. And right next to my property, a brand new gated community had sprung up, Maple Hollow Estates. I didn't think much of it until one morning when I drove up the old gravel road and found something that nearly stopped my heart. There were buildings, 28 of them, half-finished, lined up like soldiers across my family's land. Construction equipment, concrete trucks, and bright orange vests filled the space where my father's old barn used to be. A giant banner hung from the fencing that read, "Future site of Maple Hollow Phase 2, luxury condos from the mid-$500s." At first, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. Then I saw the oak tree, the one my father carved our initials into when I was 10, standing right behind the construction zone, surrounded by dirt and rebar. My stomach dropped. I parked, stormed out of the truck, and flagged down the nearest worker. "Excuse me. What the hell is going on here?" The man looked up from his clipboard, squinting at me. "You're not supposed to be here, sir. This is a private site." "Private?" I snapped. "This is my land." He looked nervous. "You'll have to talk to the site supervisor." The supervisor turned out to be a man named Rick, wearing a reflective vest and a permanent smirk. "You must be the guy holding up the paperwork," he said, offering a hand I didn't take. "You're about a month late. We've already poured foundations on half the units." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "You built on private property without permission. You're trespassing." Rick laughed. "Sir, the land was approved for development by the homeowners association. You can take it up with them if you have a complaint." That's when it hit me. The HOA, the same one from Maple Hollow Estates next door, had somehow claimed authority over my land. But how? I hadn't sold it, leased it, or signed a damn thing. I spent the next 2 hours digging through the county records office, and what I found made my blood boil. The HOA president, a woman named Karen Lowe, had filed paperwork a year earlier claiming that my parcel had been absorbed their development zone. They'd used a forged signature, mine, and presented fraudulent documents to the county zoning board. Somehow, the application had been approved. I called Karen immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, Mr. Hale. So glad you called. I was hoping we could discuss this in a civilized manner." "Civilized?" I barked. "You built 28 condos on my land without permission." She sighed dramatically. "The land was unused for years. We assumed you had abandoned it. The community voted to repurpose it. You'll be compensated, of course." "Compensated?" I repeated. "You forged documents, stole my property, and now you're building on it." "Well," she said, her tone sharpening, "the project's nearly complete. Stopping construction now would hurt dozens of families who've already bought units. Let's be reasonable, shall we?" I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Reasonable wasn't going to cut it. The next week was a blur of lawyers, meetings, and sleepless nights. My attorney, a sharp guy named Miguel, couldn't believe what he saw. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," he said. "But undoing it is going to take months. Maybe years." "I don't have years," I said. "They're pouring concrete on my father's land." Then, Miguel said slowly, "You need to remind them whose name is on the deed." That's when I got the idea. I didn't go to the media, didn't start a lawsuit right away. I went to the local building commission, zoning department, and fire safety bureau. I filed complaints, all backed with legitimate proof, land surveys, ownership records, and the original title deed. The next step was simple: wait for the inevitable cease and desist order, but while the paperwork crawled through the system, I had another plan brewing. See, the HOA thought they owned the property now. But legally, they didn't. Every nail, every wall, every concrete slab they built belonged to me. And if I wanted to demolish it, there wasn't a single thing they could do about it. I called up my old friend, Tyler, who ran a demolition company. "You still got those big toys?" I asked. "You mean the excavators?" he said, laughing. "Sure. What are we knocking down?" "About 28 illegal condos," I said. There was a long pause. "You're kidding." "I'm not." By Friday morning, the plan was set. I had a temporary court injunction proving the land was mine and that any continued construction was illegal. And at 7 a.m., 3 massive demolition trucks rolled up the old gravel road, their engines growling like thunder. When we arrived, the workers were already there, confused by the sight of the convoy. Rick came running out of one of the units, waving his arms. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you think you're doing?" "Taking back my property," I said calmly, handing him the court order. "You're trespassing. You have 30 minutes to clear out." He stammered. "You can't just..." "I can," I said, stepping closer. "And I will." By 8 a.m., the first excavator clawed into the side of the nearest condo. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and dust filled the air. The workers scattered like ants. Karen arrived minutes later in a BMW, screeching to a halt on the dirt road. She jumped out, heels sinking into the mud. "Stop this immediately," she shrieked. "You're destroying our property." "No," I said, turning to face her. "I'm destroying mine." She waved a stack of papers. "You'll be sued for millions." I smiled. "You might want to read page 2 of the injunction. You forged my signature, Karen. You'll be lucky if you're not behind bars by next week." Her face went pale. It took 3 days to level the site. Every illegal condo came down, one by one. I left the oak tree standing, untouched, the same tree my father carved when I was a boy. When the dust finally settled, all that remained were piles of rubble and silence. But I wasn't done. With the help of my lawyer, I filed criminal charges for fraud, trespassing, and property theft. The county sheriff's office launched an investigation, and within a month, the HOA's development committee was facing indictments. Karen tried to blame the contractors, the surveyors, even her vice president. None of it worked. The local news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Homeowners Association builds condos on private land, owner demolishes them all." People couldn't get enough of it. Comment sections were flooded with support, calling me a hero for standing up to corporate greed. The HOA tried to sue me for emotional distress, but the case was thrown out within a week. Turns out, committing fraud doesn't earn you sympathy points in court. Once the dust settled, literally and legally, I sat on the edge of the old property, looking at the empty field where the condos once stood. Tyler joined me, handing over a cold beer. "You sure you don't want to rebuild something here?" he asked. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun was setting behind the hills. "Eventually," I said. "But not condos. This land deserves better." He nodded. "Your dad would have been proud." I smiled. "Yeah. I think he would." Over the next few months, I turned the property into something new, a nature reserve, dedicated in my father's name. Trails wound through the oak trees, benches overlooked the lake, and a small cabin stood where our old one used to be. I even put up a sign at the entrance, "Hail Preserve, private property. Respect the land." Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I'd see people walking the trails, breathing in the peace that had almost been stolen. The scars from the condos had long been cleared away, but I left one small pile of stone untouched near the entrance. A reminder: not all battles are fought in courtrooms or on paper. Some are fought with conviction, a bulldozer, and the courage to say, "No, you don't get to take what's mine," and every time I see the morning light hit that oak tree, I remember the lesson my father taught me long ago: land isn't just dirt, son. It's history. And history is worth defending. When I first moved into Maplewood Hills, I thought I'd finally found peace. The neighborhood looked like something straight out of a postcard: neatly trimmed lawns, white fences, children riding bikes, and houses so similar they could have been copied and pasted. It was the kind of place where people waved good morning but secretly counted how many times you mowed your lawn. Still, after years of city noise, I wanted quiet, order, and safety. My wife, Lily, and I bought the corner house, the one with the big backyard. The HOA brochure promised community harmony and enhanced property values. What it didn't mention was the endless rules: no exterior paint without approval, no visible trash cans, no mailboxes that didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. For the first few months, we followed the rules to the letter. Then, one spring morning, Lily planted a small vegetable garden behind the fence. Just a few tomato plants, herbs, and peppers. It wasn't visible from the street. But within a week, a letter showed up in our mailbox: notice of violation, unapproved landscaping, vegetable garden not permitted under HOA policy section 14.2. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of mix-up. But the next day, the HOA president herself, Karen Peterson, came knocking. She was everything you'd imagine an HOA president to be: perfectly pressed khakis, clipboard in hand, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," she said sweetly. "I'm sure you've received our notice. You'll need to remove the garden immediately." "It's behind the fence," I said. "It's not bothering anyone." Karen's smile didn't falter. "It's about maintaining uniformity. We can't have people growing produce. It attracts pests, lowers curb appeal, and it's food," I interrupted. "Healthy, homegrown food." Her smile vanished. "Rules are rules. You have 7 days." And with that, she turned and walked away. I thought about ignoring her, but the next notice came with a fine: $100. Then $200. Then $500. The letters kept coming, each more threatening than the last. I tried reasoning with the board, even attended one of their monthly meetings. It was a joke. They dismissed me before I even finished my sentence. That night, Lily sat beside me on the porch. "We could move," she said quietly, but I wasn't ready to give up. My father used to say, "You can't fight stubborn people with anger. You fight them with patience and paperwork." So that's exactly what I did. First, I started reading every single page of the HOA bylaws, 68 pages of tiny, bureaucratic text. Buried deep in section 22, I found something interesting: home-based businesses were allowed, as long as they were non-disruptive and did not alter the residential nature of the property. That's when it hit me. If my garden couldn't exist as landscaping, maybe it could exist as a business. The next day, I registered an LLC called Green Haven Herbs, and filed it as a home-based agricultural microbusiness. I listed my backyard as the production site for culinary herbs and ornamental plants. Legally, I was now operating under a completely different rule set, one the HOA couldn't touch without violating state business laws. Then I went all in. I expanded the garden, added raised beds, compost bins, and a small greenhouse. I built wooden signs that read Green Haven Herbs, locally grown, naturally fresh. Every Saturday morning, I set up a little stand near my driveway and sold potted herbs and spices: basil, rosemary, thyme, mint. At first, it was just neighbors dropping by out of curiosity. But within a few weeks, local restaurants started buying from me. A few food bloggers posted about my garden-to-table herbs, and suddenly, my driveway was full every weekend. Karen lost her mind. She showed up again, this time with 2 board members in tow. "This is not acceptable," she barked. "You're running a commercial enterprise out of your home." I handed her a folder with my business license, tax ID, and local compliance permits. "Everything's legal," I said. Her eyes flicked over the papers. But this changes the neighborhood character." "Then maybe," I said calmly, "the neighborhood needs a little character." They stormed off, furious. The next week, I got another letter. The HOA was now fining me for excessive foot traffic and unauthorized signage. I sent them copies of the state's small business code and reminded them that they had no jurisdiction over licensed commerce. When that didn't work, they tried intimidation, parking their cars near my driveway, photographing customers, and even calling code enforcement. But every time, the city officials sided with me. My permits were airtight. Months passed. The fines piled up, but I refused to pay. I had evidence that the HOA was overstepping. So, I gathered every letter, every email, every threat, and handed it to my lawyer. His name was Mark Wilkes, a friend of my brother's who loved nothing more than taking down overzealous HOAs. "Oh, this is going to be fun," he said, grinning as he flipped through the folder. He filed a lawsuit for harassment, unlawful fines, and interference with lawful business operations. The case gained traction fast. Local news outlets picked it up, and suddenly, I was the guy who took on the HOA for his garden. Karen hated it. She called an emergency board meeting to reconsider policies. But the residents were turning against her. People were tired of the HOA's control. They'd been fined for everything from hanging holiday lights to having the wrong mailbox color. My story gave them courage. One evening, after the lawsuit was filed, I heard a knock at the door. It was Karen. This time, her voice wasn't smug, it was trembling. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped onto the porch, crossing my arms. "Go ahead." She sighed, her composure cracking. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. The board's under pressure. The media attention, it's bad for everyone. Maybe we can make this go away quietly." "By quietly, you mean drop the lawsuit?" I said. "Yes. We'll remove the fines. Just end it." I shook my head. "No. You don't get to break rules and walk away when you're caught. You've bullied people for years. It's time someone held you accountable." Her lips tightened. "You'll regret this." She turned and walked into the night, but I didn't regret it. The court date came 3 months later. My lawyer presented everything: emails, recordings, witness statements from neighbors who had also been harassed. The judge was unimpressed with the HOA's defense. When it was over, the HOA was ordered to pay $75,000 in damages and refund every illegal fine they'd ever issued to homeowners in the community. Karen was removed from her position. The day the verdict came down, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. People were smiling. Some even brought flowers from their own backyards and left them at our gate in support. But the story didn't end there. With the settlement money, I expanded Green Haven Herbs into a full-fledged business. I bought a nearby plot of land, ironically, one that used to be managed by the same HOA, and built a greenhouse complex. We started producing organic herb kits for schools and local stores. Within a year, I was employing half a dozen people and supplying fresh herbs across the county. Every time I saw our label in a local market, I thought back to that first letter from the HOA, the one that called my garden a violation. Funny how life works. A few months after the lawsuit, Karen moved out of Maplewood Hills. The new HOA president was a kind woman named Trina, who actually believed in community. Under her, the rules softened. People painted their doors bright colors. Kids played soccer in the cul-de-sac without parents panicking about lawn damage. And yes, several new gardens appeared behind fences all over the neighborhood. One afternoon, I was tending to the basil when a car pulled up. An elderly man stepped out, holding a small pot of lavender. "You're the garden guy, right?" he asked. "That's me." He smiled. "I used to grow these with my wife. Haven't in years. But I saw what you did here, it gave me hope. Maybe I'll start again." I handed him a tray of herbs on the house. "That's what it's all about." He smiled, eyes misty, and drove away. Later that night, Lily joined me by the fence, watching the fireflies flicker through the garden. "You turned something ugly into something beautiful," she said softly. I looked at the rows of green leaves swaying in the evening breeze. "I just did what Dad taught me," I said. "If someone tries to bury you, grow back stronger." She laughed, leaning her head on my shoulder. A year later, Greenhaven Herbs had expanded into 3 towns. We were shipping small garden kits across the state. Our slogan, printed on every box, said, "From rebellion to roots, grow what they said you couldn't." Sometimes, new customers would ask about the story behind the name. I'd smile and tell them the short version: an HOA tried to stop me from planting herbs. Now I sell them by the thousands. And every time I said it, I felt that same quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes not from revenge, but from victory built with patience, hard work, and a few well-placed seeds, because sometimes, the best way to win isn't by tearing something down, it's by growing something so powerful they can't ever cut it out again. When I first moved into Cedar Ridge Estates, I thought I was stepping into paradise. The community brochure called it a peaceful retreat of luxury living, and to be fair, it looked the part: wide clean streets, neatly lined maple trees, and houses so polished they almost sparkled under the morning sun. I bought the place because of the view. My house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, overlooking the valley below. The drive-up was steep, but I didn't mind. I liked the privacy. Or at least, I used to. Then the HOA got involved. At first, it was little things. Notices about my mailbox being 2 inches too tall. Warnings about my trash cans being visible for more than an hour. Fines for leaving my truck parked in my own driveway overnight. I tried to laugh it off. Bureaucrats with clipboards and power trips, I told myself. But it didn't stop there. It started getting personal. The HOA president, a man named Greg Whitman, seemed to have made me his personal project. He lived 3 houses down, the kind of guy who wore golf polos even when it rained and loved reminding people he was on the board. One morning, I came out to find 2 orange cones placed across my driveway. A handwritten note sat on my windshield: temporary HOA restriction, driveway access closed for landscaping improvements. Landscaping? I looked around. The street was empty. No trucks, no workers, no signs of any improvement. I moved the cones and drove off anyway. That night, another letter appeared on my door: violation, tampering with HOA safety equipment. I laughed. Then I noticed the $250 fine printed at the bottom. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Every morning, cones. Every evening, another fine. Greg would stand on the sidewalk, pretending to water his lawn while watching me move them. Once, I even caught him smirking. I called the HOA office to complain, but they brushed me off. Mr. Whitman is acting within his rights to enforce community regulations, they said. Blocking someone's driveway isn't a regulation, I snapped. The woman on the phone sighed. Sir, please attend the next HOA meeting if you have concerns. So I did. That meeting was my first real look at how the HOA worked. A dozen people in folding chairs, Greg sitting at the head of the table like a king on his throne. The air was thick with smugness. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out everything: the cones, the fines, the harassment. Greg interrupted me halfway through. Mr. Blake, he said, leaning back. You agreed to abide by HOA rules when you moved in. The association maintains our shared spaces, and that includes access to your driveway. Access you keep blocking, I shot back. He smiled thinly. Only temporarily. I could see I was outnumbered. Every other board member nodded along, either afraid of him or too lazy to care. I left that meeting knowing one thing for sure: I wasn't going to win by arguing, but my father always said, if you can't go through them, go around them. So I started digging, not literally, at first. I went to the county registrar's office and pulled every public record I could find on Cedar Ridge Estates. That's when I found something curious. The HOA owned most of the community roads, except for one. My street. Years ago, the developer had sold off portions of the land to private buyers before the HOA was formed. The record showed a small, privately maintained access road at the end of the cul-de-sac, right where my house sat. But the current ownership had lapsed due to unpaid taxes years earlier, meaning the county was auctioning it off. I couldn't believe my luck. 2 weeks later, I showed up at the county auction. The entire stretch of road, from the cul-de-sac entrance to my driveway, sold for $4,300. I signed the paperwork on the spot. By the following week, I was the legal owner of the very street Greg had been using to harass me. I didn't tell anyone right away. Instead, I waited. The cones kept appearing. The fines kept coming. Greg was relentless. Finally, one morning, I decided it was time. I parked my truck sideways across the street entrance and put up my own signs: private road, no HOA access. Trespassers will be towed. At first, no one noticed. But when Greg tried to drive up later that afternoon, I stood there with my arms crossed. He rolled down his window. "What the hell is this?" "My property," I said calmly. "You're trespassing." He laughed. "You can't own a street." I handed him a copy of the deed. "You might want to check the county records." His face turned the color of spoiled milk. "This is ridiculous. The HOA owns this development." "Not this part," I said. "This part's mine." He sped off, nearly clipping my mailbox in the process. By evening, I got an official HOA notice threatening legal action. The next morning, my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Dana, sent them a response. Her letter was short and brutal: all further contact must be through legal counsel. Any attempt to access Mr. Blake's private property without authorization will be treated as trespassing. That shut them up for a while. But Greg wasn't done. He started parking his car just outside the boundary line, blocking everyone else's access instead. The neighbors began complaining, not to me, but to him. The HOA started fracturing under the weight of his pettiness. Meanwhile, I had other plans. Owning that street gave me control, and I decided to make use of it. I had the pavement redone, installed my own lighting, and even hired a small private security company to patrol. Then I put up a small sign: Blake Way, private access. Residents welcome by permission only. You'd be amazed how quickly the HOA started panicking. Without access through my street, garbage trucks couldn't enter the cul-de-sac. Delivery drivers had to park blocks away. The inconvenience spread fast. A week later, Greg came storming up to my porch. No clipboard this time, just rage. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I can, and I have," I said evenly. "This affects the whole neighborhood." "Then maybe," I said, "the neighborhood should have thought twice before letting you run it like a dictatorship." He pointed a finger at me. "We'll sue you." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll see you in court, on my road." When he left, I called Dana. "He's threatening legal action," I said. She chuckled. "Good. That means he's losing." And lose he did. The lawsuit never even made it past the first hearing. The judge dismissed it after 5 minutes, citing my deed as irrefutable proof of ownership. The HOA was ordered to pay my legal fees. But I wasn't finished. I decided to make the most of my newfound property. I petitioned the city to recognize Blake Way as a private toll street, meaning anyone who used it had to pay a nominal access fee, except me, of course. The city approved it. The HOA tried to fight it, but their reputation was already in shambles. Soon, every resident of Cedar Ridge Estates had to pay me $50 a month for road access. It wasn't much, but it was poetic justice. Greg had spent months blocking my driveway. Now he had to pay to drive past it. He lasted 3 months before resigning as HOA president. When the new board took over, they approached me differently. One morning, the new president, a young woman named Sarah, came to my door with a cup of coffee and an apology. "Mr. Blake," she said, "we're sorry for what happened. The old leadership was out of control. We'd like to work together to make things right." I nodded slowly, "Then start by removing all those bogus fines and rewriting the rules so no one else has to deal with what I did." She agreed. And she kept her word. Within a month, Cedar Ridge Estates transformed. The rigid, joyless atmosphere lifted. Neighbors started chatting, kids played on lawns again, and the endless fines stopped. People even began thanking me for standing up to the HOA. For Greg, he sold his house and moved away. I heard he joined another HOA in the next town over. Poor souls. A few weeks later, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue on my private road. Everyone brought food, laughter filled the air, and for the first time since I'd moved in, it actually felt like a community. Sarah raised a toast halfway through the evening. To Mr. Blake, she said. For reminding us that a neighborhood isn't about control, it's about respect. The crowd cheered. I smiled, looking around at the families, the food, the laughter, all on the very street they once tried to use against me. Later, when the sun went down and the stars came out, I sat on my porch with a cold beer in hand. I looked at the freshly painted sign at the end of the road, Blake Way, private property. Welcome home, and I couldn't help but grin, because in the end, I didn't just win a fight with the HOA, I took back my piece, 1 square foot of asphalt at a time. When I bought my home in Maple Creek Estates, I thought I was finally settling down. After 20 years in construction, I wanted peace, a quiet neighborhood, a bit of land, and neighbors who minded their own business. Maple Creek looked perfect, tree-lined streets, neatly painted mailboxes, and manicured lawns. The real estate agent mentioned the homeowners association only in passing. They just handle maintenance, she'd said with a smile. Nothing to worry about. That was my first mistake. The second was parking my work truck in the driveway. It wasn't an eyesore, a clean silver Ford F-250 with my company logo on the door, Harrison and Sons Contracting. I ran a small business with my 2 nephews, doing everything from decks to full renovations. I needed the truck daily. But apparently, the HOA didn't share my appreciation for utility vehicles. 3 days after moving in, a letter appeared in my mailbox. Notice of violation. Commercial vehicle parked in residential driveway. Remove within 24 hours to avoid fines or towing. I shrugged it off. There was no street parking overnight, and my garage was too small. I figured I'd sort it out at the next HOA meeting, but when I came out the following morning, my truck was gone. At first, I thought it had been stolen. Then I saw the chalk marks on the driveway and a small orange tag stuck to my mailbox, vehicle towed under HOA Regulation Section 12.4. I felt my blood pressure spike. My livelihood, my tools, materials, and contracts were all in that truck. I called the number on the tag. A bored voice answered, Premier Recovery Services. Yeah, I said, trying to stay calm. You've got my truck. F-250, silver. It was parked at 341 Maple Creek. Let me check, the woman said. I could hear typing. Yes, we towed that at 3:17 a.m. Release fee is $400, plus $60 per day storage. 3 in the morning? I snapped. You're kidding. Sir, you'll need to pay in cash or certified funds. I hung up before I said something that would land me in jail. It took half a day to get my truck back, and another 2 weeks to cool off. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I'd worked my entire life for that truck. And some clipboard warrior had decided it didn't fit the community aesthetic. I went to the next HOA meeting, determined to set things straight. The board sat behind a long folding table, led by Eleanor Shaw, a retired banker who treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. Good evening, Mr. Harrison, she said, eyes cold. I understand you had an issue with vehicle compliance. Yeah, I said. You towed my work truck without warning. There was a notice, she replied smoothly. Our bylaws prohibit commercial vehicles from being visible. It disrupts uniformity. Uniformity? I said, incredulous. It's a truck, not a carnival ride. Her smile tightened. Rules are rules. You signed them when you moved in. I looked around the room. A few neighbors avoided eye contact, others nodded along with her like sheep. I realized arguing wouldn't help. So, I played the long game. First, I dug into the HOA's finances. County records showed they'd contracted a local towing company, Premier Recovery, for enforcement. Curious, I checked the business registry. It was a small outfit with 3 trucks, owned by a man named Larry Dempsey. Larry's Yelp reviews were terrible: predatory towing, scams residents, charges double the legal rate. I kept reading until I found something interesting: a lien on his business property and a pending foreclosure notice. That was my opening. I called him the next day. Larry, name's Ben Harrison. I run a small contracting firm. I heard you're looking to sell. He hesitated. Who told you that? Doesn't matter, I said. What matters is I can pay cash. 2 weeks later, Premier Recovery Services was mine. I bought it outright, debts and all. The bank was thrilled to be rid of it. Larry looked relieved. I kept one of his drivers, a guy named Tony, and replaced the rest with my own crew. Then I filed new paperwork with the county, renaming it Harrison Recovery and Logistics. The HOA still thought they had a towing contract with Premier Recovery. They didn't notice that I now owned it. I waited for the right moment. The next violation letter came after I parked my truck in the same spot again. Eleanor must have thought she'd caught me slipping. That night, I saw a towing truck roll slowly up the hill, one of mine. I'd told my driver exactly what to do. He backed into my driveway, hooked the truck up halfway, and stopped. Then he knocked on my door. Hey, boss, he said loud enough for the security camera to catch it. You wanted the photo proof? Yep, I said, grinning. Make sure the HOA president gets a copy. He laughed and drove off, leaving the truck right where it was. The next morning, Eleanor came strutting down the street like she owned it. She stopped dead when she saw the truck still sitting there. Mr. Harrison, she said, hands on her hips. I gave clear notice. Why wasn't this vehicle towed? Oh, it was, I said. Same company you hired, they just work for me now. Her face turned crimson. You, what? I handed her a copy of the ownership papers. You might want to read the fine print. The HOA contract is with my company. You can't, this is unethical. What's unethical, I said, is towing someone's work truck at 3 in the morning. You broke your own bylaws doing that. She sputtered something about conflict of interest and stormed off. Over the next month, things got quiet. Too quiet. Then, at the following HOA meeting, the board voted to terminate their relationship with Premier Recovery. I smiled. That was step 2 of my plan. Before they could hire a new company, I used the money from my contracting business to purchase the only other towing yard in town. I re-registered it under a different name, Northline Enforcement, still owned by me through a holding company. Guess who the HOA hired next? When the first complaint about unauthorized parking came in, my driver called me laughing. Ben, they just asked us to tow your own truck again. Go ahead, I said. Hook it up, and then unhook it. We did that 3 times before Eleanor realized what was happening. By then, I'd documented everything, emails, invoices, every absurd fine they'd tried to hit me with. I compiled it all into a folder and sent it to a lawyer I'd worked with on construction disputes. He grinned when he saw it. This is gold. They're exceeding their authority under state HOA statutes. We can sue for harassment and property interference. Within 2 months, the HOA was in court. They tried to play the victim, claiming I'd manipulated the towing system. But my lawyer tore through them like drywall. Your Honor, he said, holding up one of the HOA's violation letters, this board illegally ordered towing without proper due process. My client lawfully purchased the business enforcing those orders. The irony writes itself. The judge didn't laugh, but I did, quietly. In the end, the HOA lost. They were fined for improper enforcement practices and ordered to reimburse all towing and fine costs to residents, over $40,000. Eleanor was forced to resign. Word spread quickly. Other HOA-controlled neighborhoods in the area started reevaluating their towing policies. Some even hired my company to manage enforcement ethically. That was when I realized I'd stumbled into something bigger. I expanded Harrison Recovery into a legitimate business, offering fair price towing, roadside help, and construction hauling. Within a year, we had 8 trucks and contracts across 3 counties. As for Maple Creek Estates, things changed. The new HOA president, a younger guy named Daniel, came to see me one afternoon. Mr. Harrison, he said sheepishly, I want to apologize for everything. The last board went too far. We'd like to start fresh. I nodded. Fair enough. But there's one condition, you stop harassing people for living their lives. No more overnight witch hunts, no more ridiculous fines. He agreed. That weekend, I parked my truck in the driveway again, toolbox shining under the sun. Nobody said a word. Over the next months, the neighborhood actually began to feel like a community. Kids played basketball in driveways. Neighbors waved instead of scowling. The new HOA focused on real issues: streetlights, landscaping, safety. One evening, Daniel stopped by with a beer. "You know," he said, "the irony of you owning the towing company that took down the old board, that's legendary." I laughed. "Poetic justice." He nodded. "What did you end up naming the truck in those photos?" "The one they tried to tow?" "Freedom," I said. "Because every time I look at it, I remember what happens when you stop letting people push you around." He raised his beer. "To freedom, then." We clinked bottles. As the sun dipped below the trees, I looked out at my driveway, my truck sitting proudly where it belonged, and felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about principle. People like Eleanor thought power came from paper rules and signatures. But I'd learned something different. Real power comes from knowledge, from knowing the system well enough to beat it fair and square, and sometimes, if you're patient enough, the system ends up working for you.